This Week in Radio Tech, episode 180, is brought to you by Axia Audio and the Workhorse Axia Element Audio Console. Watch the Axia installation video and find out more at axiaaudio.com.
And now, our feature presentation.
TWiRT.
Let me help you help me to help you. Bryan Jones joins us to help engineers get the most from tech support.
All right, calm down. He says that to everyone.
This calls for immediate discussion.
What's up, Doc?
All your days are belong to us.
From his palatial office of important business,
or in a choice hotel in a distant land.
This is Kirk Harnack.
Chris Tobin joins me, along with War Stories guest and 15-year tech support veteran, Bryan Jones.
You're dialed in to This Week in Radio Tech.
Hey, welcome in. It's time for This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host, wearing glasses this week. Ta-da! Four Eyes, they call me. This is the show where we talk about radio technology, everything from the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower. Sometimes we really need to talk about the light bulb at the top of the tower so we can make that statement come true. This is episode number 180 of our show. Yes, we've done 179 before now, and this is 180. We have so much fun with this. I hope you do too. We do talk about all things radio technology, and every 10 episodes, we try to put together an episode that we call War Stories. This is where we talk about engineers, and we get engineers to talk about being in the trenches, some experience that you had, that they had, that our guests have had, that our hosts have had, that, well, hopefully it's a learning experience. Hopefully it's one of those, I won't do that again. Or if I ever run across that again, I'll know how to handle it. So it's a War Stories episode. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. I do work for the folks at Telos, the Telos Alliance, and I'm the VP of the Telos division. But we have two other people on the show. First of all, one of our co-hosts who's almost always here. Please welcome in Chris Tobin, the best-dressed engineer in radio. Hey, Chris.
Hello, Kirk. Hello, Bryan. Yes, I'm coming from my home studios here in Manhattan. So I'm with the folks at CCS Music Cam, and we do video and audio IP codecs for disclosure. So this way we're all on level playing field here.
That's right. If we accidentally say something really nice about Music Cam, well, we know where
there's nothing. You can never say anything wrong about Music Cam, Telos, all those other guys.
You're right. The key to any of this tech, and you guys, Music Cam's been making codecs for years, and Telos has been making codecs for almost as long, I think. And the key there is understanding the technology, understanding how to put it to use, and then by golly, it'll work. It's difficult when you don't understand the technology.
This is true. Yeah. No, we have a lot of folks that our IP is becoming something like ISDN and Switch 56 was, 20 years ago. So it's been a great learning experiences here.
So our guest, we have a guest on this War Stories episode. This is my personal friend. I work with him, and he works for us at the Telos Alliance, but he didn't always. In fact, I got to interview Bryan a few months before he came online with us. I'll go into that later. Let's just bring him on from the West Coast, somewhere in the Seattle area. Ladies and gentlemen, Bryan Jones. Hey, Bryan, welcome in, Bryan.
Thank you very much. Actually, closer to Portland, Oregon here, Kirk. Just for you, if this will make you feel any better. There you go. I got my glasses on just for you. Actually, I'm coming to you from the, as Chris would say, the home studio, but this really is. I live in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon. So, not to be confused. I usually tell people when they ask me where I'm from that I'm from Portland, Oregon, because otherwise you tell them you're from Vancouver, Washington, and they think
Vancouver, BC.
BC, eh? Canada.
Yeah. Now,
we like to say this is the real Vancouver. So,
do you live close to where that bridge collapsed?
That's actually north of Seattle by about maybe 45 minutes. Yeah,
almost the whole state away from you going north.
Okay. Closer than you, but it's still quite a ways away.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, hey, thanks for correcting me on that. I thought you're in the Seattle area. So now I'm clear. Vancouver, BC. Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, boy, there you go.
Just solidified my point, though.
I just want to say BC after Vancouver. Wow. So, Bryan, tell us a little bit about yourself. The first time I talked to you, and I may have met you before this, but I talked to you about coming to work on my team when I was in the international sales arena at Telos. And in chatting with you, I got I got this great sense that you love talking to people, that you're very easy and fluid time talking to anybody. And then I got the notion that, dang, this guy's got some technical chops. He's been around and fixed a few things. So tell me about yourself. I want to start with the whole career, but give me some couple of highlights.
Well, like most of us, radio is sort of one of those things that I just can't seem to get away from. I started in high school, which for anybody who's counting, I was a senior in high school when I started, and that was 1985. And I started out doing mostly. I was only ever really in small markets in central Washington, a little town called Moses Lake. If anybody happens to know where that is, worked at all the little small radio stations that were out there, and just like anybody does that works in a small radio station, you get an opportunity to do a lot of things. So I worked overnight changing tapes. I worked, mornings doing the call-in. Hey, I lost my dog. I have an old car for sale. The call-in classifieds. I did those, and just kind of took a liking to doing more engineering and more technical stuff. And back in '85, believe it or not, we were still playing records and carts, and we had things in the radio stations that need repaired. And I just sort of seemed to have an aptitude and a liking for it, and spent most of my career on the engineering side. I left those radio stations and went to work for Broadcast Electronics, and spent, I guess it was the better part of 13 years with them doing audio vault installations and audio vault sales, and just learned a lot. Got to see a lot of neat things. Got to go a lot of a lot of cool places, and on both sides of the spectrum. Everything from little, I don't want to call them little radio stations, but that's what they are. Little radio stations that didn't do much to big, very, very, very large facilities. And so it's had an opportunity to do a lot of cool things in my career. And
when did you start? What year was it you were starting engineering and fixing a few things? Maybe teaching yourself how to fix a few things. Mid-'80s?
Probably, yeah, it would have been probably later '80s. I think I probably had to work there for a few years before anybody would trust me with a soldering iron or a screwdriver. But you follow like most small radio stations, we didn't have a full-time engineer, so I followed him around when he was in town. Tried to learn as much as I could from him. A guy by the name of Will Voss was our engineer. Will is a chief engineer for. Gosh, it's in, I think it's Saga now in Bellingham, Washington, and he'd make the trip down to Moses Lake, and I'd follow him around, and we used to call him Bonk, in case he's watching. I don't think he probably is, but he might be. We call him Bonk because every time he'd stand up, he'd knock his head on everything, so we call him Bonk.
Tall guy.
I learned a lot. He is a tall guy. I learned a lot from him, and there'd be these things that would need fixing, and I'd say, oh, well, I can fix that, or I can fix that. And so there'd be fewer and fewer things for Will to fix, and more things that I would fix. And so I think I just, kind of endeared myself to the people who had control of the cabinet that the tools were kept in, and it just sort of worked out.
Now, I want to hear from Chris Tobin on this too, but tell me, Bryan, so you had this interest in fixing things. I always did too. I built a few little Heath kits when I was in high school and got interested in working for a radio station, being on the air, but then stuff didn't work around the radio station. We had a contract engineer. This was in central Kentucky. So I started thinking, well, I can see why that pinch roller's not coming up. There's a cleaning stick in the way. So I pull the cart machine apart and somebody had taped over it, this is no good. And so I pulled the cleaning stick out of the way, and lo and behold, the cart machine worked. So I pulled the tape off, put it back in, and people said, hey, did you fix the cart machine? Yeah, I did. There was just a stick in the way. So something so obvious was my first chance to repair something. And then I became interested and started reading the manuals and began to have a little bit of confidence. Found out that maybe this machine is wobbling because the pinch roller has a flat spot in it, or maybe it's not spinning very well. So it started out a few easy confidence builders, and then I got into, hey, there's a secondary cue thing. I can wire these cart machines to where one will start the next one. And I was drilling holes in the console to put switches to enable or disable the cart. Yeah. So is that anything like how you got interested and started? Did you have a little confidence builder come along?
It was, and you know, I mean, we had these old were they Sparta turntables? Is that who made the turntables? The big, heavy ones in radio. And
Yes,
we were
others.
always having to reach over and press the little switch that was on the front of those. And I said, there's got to be an easier way. And so I was able to come up with some little relay circuits that would switch based off of the console. And boy, you get console remote starts in a small market radio station, and you've done something. So
relays. Now wait a minute. No, we just ran 110 volts to a switch in the console behind the fader knob.
Well, you only do that once.
So, Chris Tobin, what? I don't know if I've ever asked you. What got you initially started? Did you have a little confidence builder, or get thrown right into it? How did that work for you?
Well, actually, I tinkered with electronics at a very young age. In my youth, televisions in my house had vacuum tubes, and I used to take them apart. Yes. And then I also got hooked up with a college radio station and started tinkering in there. And it was interesting, some of the things I learned with them. But I guess the best confidence builder I had was took a job at a radio station part-time, and the chief engineer was a contract guy who was there for many years. Decided one day he was going to take some vacation. He says, well, you're young enough. You look like you can think on your feet. I'll be back in a week. If you have any problems, here's a number I'll be at. I'm like, yeah, but I'm part-time. I'm commuting from a place back. I'm new to this part of the country. That's okay. You'll be fine. Don't worry. Like, okay. Of course, the second night, first night went well. I'm like, yeah, this is great. Second night, the weather pattern changed and a storm rolled through. Unbeknownst to me, the tower site is on top of a mountain. The mountain is known for its electrical storm activity. And we had a 3-tower AM directional along with the 4th tower as the FM. So you could basically see the Ben Franklin rods, the lightning rods out there on the top of the hill. Sure enough, electrical storm rolled through. We not only got lightning discharge near the towers that disrupted all kinds of electronics in the buildings. We lost electrical. Power line went down. Generator had problems starting, but it came online. And the program director I discovered was one of those types that if anything goes just a little hinky with the radio station, he's in panic mode for the duration of the event. Second day into the job, I got confronted with GM, PD, screaming, hollering, what are you going to do about this? Why is this happening? And, what can you do about it? And my first response was, because, I'm a kid from New York, well, first of all, there's nothing I can do about the lightning, so you'll have to deal with that on your own. Can't deal with the thunderstorm that just rolled in. That's something the weatherman will have to talk about. And I said, as far as the generator is concerned, according to the gauges on the front of this unit, by the way, this is a 1956 World War II surplus generator. So use your imagination as to what it looked like, how it ran, what it sounded like, and probably the little strippings that were taking place on the head gasket covers.
Yes.
And it's also 8 o'clock at night during a storm. So, second day on the job. And that was my, confidence builder. By the time the week was over, everybody was praising what I had done, which, by the time the week was over, I think I hadn't slept for 4 days. I discovered that you definitely need to think on your feet, assume the infamous phrase or the popular phrase of what if, and how to fix it or answer that question. So since that time, back in 1981, 82, everywhere I go, no matter what I've been doing, I look at a situation, first thing I think of is, what if this happens? How do I resolve it? And even to this day, I'm still doing it with a lot of people. So one thing I will say, it's a learning experience. You're learning every day. It never stops. I'm sure both you, Kirk, and Bryan would agree that every day is still learning.
Hey, let me throw out an idea here about your early days in learning about RF. Now, Bryan, you may have come along near the end of the following technology, but I'll bet you Chris Tobin and I were right in there. And who knows, Bryan, you may have been in there too. I started working, actually my first job was for an FM station. It was a public radio station. And at the time I started working for the station, it was WEKU FM in Richmond, Kentucky. And at the day I started working with them as a volunteer, as just an intern on the air, the main transmitter had a fire. It had burned up. Now, as soon as I tell you which transmitter it was, you'll say, oh, okay, that makes sense. It was an RCA BTF-20E or E1, right?
You can't give those away now.
You can't. I know. Somebody's trying to give me one right now, actually. True. And it caught fire. The cavity tended to catch fire. Maybe you can elaborate on why. But anyway, all I knew is when I came to work for this station as an intern, they were on 10 watts. They had some kind of little bitty rack mount, but not little, it's actually kind of big, a tube type exciter that went to a little antenna on the roof of the studio building. And we probably covered the campus and a little part of Richmond, Kentucky, the campus of Eastern Kentucky University. And so I was taught to sign on by coming in, flipping the light on, and going over to this little transmitter and turning it on, and we were on the air. And I didn't even kind of think about the fact that this thing didn't go but 5-10 miles. The antenna was probably all of 30 feet off the ground. So they were operating on this, an STA, Special Temporary Authority from the FCC, until they got the transmitter site rebuilt. And I kind of remember about that day, they were back on full power, and we started using the Mosley remote control again. But here's my point in where I'm going to. So first I worked for an FM station, and then I worked for an AM station. That's backwards for a lot of folks. A lot of folks in small towns begin working at an AM station. So anyway, I went from the public station to a commercial AM station, and I got to see the transmitter site. I went out there with the engineer, and so I kind of got this notion of the differences between FM, which had this transmitter box and this coax that went up the tower to an antenna, and AM, which was we had a transmitter box and perhaps a piece of coax or a piece of line anyway that went out to the tower, and the whole tower was the antenna. Okay, that was interesting. Then the first time I came across doing a remote broadcast, right? Remember that? And you had a Marty unit. And everybody called it the Marty, just like Kleenex or Xerox. It was right. An RPU, remote pickup unit, and it was this little transmitter with a mixer built into it, a mic mixer. You plug your mic into it, you'd adjust the knobs for the volume, and then you turn the transmitter on. And you might have had a whip antenna. I think the first stations I worked for had a whip antenna, and these, by the way, were probably in the 160 megahertz area. So this was higher than FM frequency, way higher than AM frequency, of course. And I noticed that the antenna is kind of small. And I was kind of thinking about, well, how does that work? And then I went to work for a station. It was, in fact, WKQQ in Lexington, Kentucky. It was a rock station. And they had a Marty, and theirs had a little antenna. It was a Yagi about this long and about this high. And it was a 450 megahertz Marty transmitter. And so I'm thinking, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Let's see. AM, huge antenna. FM, smaller but high up. Marty, 3 feet long, and then another Marty about a foot long, and I'm starting to see a pattern here. I'm starting to, the whole notion of RF is beginning to build in my head about, how these different things work. So anyway, that was some of my introduction into seeing and understanding different RF in different wavelengths and what we use it for. So Bryan, did you have any kind of similar, realizations along the way in radio?
Well, my realization came, long after leaving the little radio stations, and really how little. The one thing I wish I had in my career was more experience with AM operations, directional antennas, and sort of how the magic of that thing worked. In every radio station I worked at, we were a single stick. 5 kilowatt AM station, and we dropped down to 72 watts a night or whatever it was to protect somebody. So I really didn't, the AM either worked or it didn't. You never really had to spend any time figuring out why the transmitter wouldn't come on. We just went over and we pushed the button, and the transmitter started up. And I wish that along in my career, I'd maybe taken more time to get involved in that kind of stuff, because as I got older and progressed in my career, I realized that was the one piece that I was missing. I ended up out here in Portland, working for CBS, and we had an AM station in our cluster, which was quite a difficult station. It was a single tower. Daytime, 2-tower directional, but it was on a site that had 2 1,000-foot towers along with it and a 300-foot TV tower. And so it really was a 5-tower AM array. And the minute anybody would hang a new antenna on somewhere else, it would change everything, and it would screw it up. And I didn't have the chops to sort of figure out how to put that thing back together. And so that was really the coming to a station like that was sort of the realization that, okay, maybe, you've learned a lot, but maybe you haven't learned everything. And maybe I should have paid attention a little more as we started getting into that kind of stuff. So, it's unfortunately a dying art.
Yeah, well, AM directionals are, I don't think are the kind of thing that you just want to stick your toe in. You kind of have to get at least a bit of the whole picture to understand all the damage you can do, by not knowing what to do. I'm not saying I'd be happy to never see an AM directional again. They are interesting. But it's such a balancing act. It's like multiple teeter-totters all depending on each other. All these balls in the air, so to speak, or plates on the top of dowels.
I remember Jeff McGinley is one of our other Axia support engineers, and his dad, Tom McGinley, is one of the few guys that I know of that really knows AMRF very well. And I recall calling him on the phone one time saying, hey, Tom, I'm just having this problem. And, I tried to adjust this on the phaser and I tried to adjust that on the phaser, and there's a silence in the other end like, oh, you didn't just turn that knob, did you? Right? So it sort of drives home your point that, you should really have an understanding of what you're getting into before you go trying to fix anything. So, but that never stopped me before, so I don't know why that would now.
So Chris Tobin, the story that I just told about FM and AM and then Marty's and starting to kind of get this RF ideas gelling in my head. What was your experience learning about that? And of course, what I'm trying to relate to is how do you help somebody today who says they're interested in radio or radio engineering, and how do you help them to bring them along with these different concepts?
That's a good question. Today things are so different because in my youth, it was an environment of you do-it-yourself type thinking. You opened up a book, you sort of skimmed through it, figure out what's going on. You got shocked. And with the RF, yes. I've been doing RF since I was a kid because I was involved in building transmitters with a friend of mine, and little FM and AM transmitters we were doing, pirate radio. Back in the day when pirate radio was just a innocuous type of thing. Today it's a business, and and I can tell you that I learned a lot about RF tinkering with that technology in that form. One of the things we learned about was Q, the resonance of a tuned circuit, and it was interesting that at AM frequencies, a 3-foot long, 2-inch wide coil works really well to resonate the load of a transmitter at about 10 watts. However, because of the Q, the resonance is so high, the plastic that separated the rings of a coil, you can picture it, began to heat up because of the circulating currents on the coil. Well, we watched this little coil at 100 watts suddenly start to bend, and as it bent, it shorted, and as it shorted, the 6146 tube, which was the driving amplifier tube, began to glow, and before you know it, the 1,000-volt power supply, multi-tapped black transformer started oozing black stuff. By today's standards, it would be known as 3 letters, PCBs. And we had a small little loud sound. If you've had this happen, the sound of an arcing transmitter, whether it be AM or FM, or a circuit breaker panel has a certain sound to it. Well, that's what I learned. That was the first sound I heard in my youth, was this weird cracking sound. And I can tell you to this day, and I've had it happen to me at the Empire State Building transmitter rooms. I've had it happen to me at the AM transmitter sites I've worked at in the Meadowlands in New Jersey and in Connecticut and in other parts of the country. That sound doesn't change, whether it's 1,000 watts or 50,000 watts. It's still the same. And the hairs in the back of your neck do go up. Oh, yeah. there is a distinct sound. It's the same thing you get if you've ever had an FM25 Harris transmitter and the power supply breakers trip. Anyone who's got that transmitter knows the sound. Well, try working in a transmitter room on the 86th floor of the Empire State Building at 3 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden, you hear the sound of this cracking, thud, thunk sound takes place. The lights go out in your room, and you're sitting there going, oh, I'm off the air in New York City on an FM radio station. Not a good sound. I've had that happen. It's that kind of stuff you don't do today. So, folks I've talked to a couple of universities lately for career days, they can't even relate to the concept of tinkering because, let's say, say computers, the webcam that I'm using right now, I can't tinker with it more than just through software. But to take it apart, it's sealed. You can't do anything. 30 years ago, if you had a small camera, maybe a Brownie or an 8mm, you could take it apart. You can, break it. You can, oh, wow, I took out the sprocket. There goes the film. I can't make it happen. So that's where you learn. And in radio and television, the same. But in radio, you work at a radio station. You work alongside some person who's been doing it for 20, 30 years, the oracle of the place. And you learn what not to do or to do. As Brian pointed out, you go up to a phaser cabinet. The rule of thumb is turn no knob, mark every setting that you've got, or write down the numbers adjacent to the knob, and then contact the last person who tuned it to find out exactly the inner workings of what goes on. If you don't do that, as Brian found out, you will get that, oh, did you know? Okay, tell you what. Back down the power of the transmitter by 50%, step away from everything. I'm on my way out to help you.
Yeah.
Now I say that because I have had that happen. I did not do the turning of the knobs. Somebody else who was inexperienced, who was more of a computer person, that was given the job of transmitter engineer as well, the studio. When I received a phone call from this person, who was a friend of mine, I always told him, whatever you do, never turn the handles on this box. Why? Here's why. Let's sketch it out. Well, he panicked because he received a phone call from the FCC inspector, the local inspector, saying, I'm coming out to check out your place. I've already been out there. I've made my measurements, and we'll talk in the morning. So he panicked. He started turning knobs because he wanted to check stuff and make things look what he thought was correct. And he detuned the 2-tower AM directional so well that the transmitter could barely make power, and it would trip the plate breakers every time you turned it on. Needless to say, I spent many hours the night before trying to get it back to parameter based on some of the documents that were still there, because that was the other thing people, for some reason, thought wasn't necessary. Yeah, I found this notebook, this spiral notebook. I can't believe people still use it. And it's got all these weird numbers, like a number and a J and an O. And I said, yeah, what'd you do with that book? It's somewhere. Do me a favor. Sit in that corner. Think about the last thing you did with that book and come back to me and let's find it. Thank goodness he remembered. He tossed it on a pile of other books that looked like this one. If you can read what it says, directional broadcast.
How is it that you have a book like that sitting right there? How is that?
It's in my book here. I have other books here too. I have Electronics 1.7.
Oh, Jack Layton wrote that. Oh my goodness, Jack is fantastic.
This is a Jack Layton book because why? Jack Layton also, and this is what I told you about how you learn and you develop and you never know when you may have to look back at stuff. I have a 1946 NAB handbook at home, and I have it, and in it tells you how to set up equalized lines with a 111C coil. Okay, you don't find that anymore, but here's another thing. You can see this because I can't tell. I'm blocking myself. All right, let's see if we do this right. Here we go. Demystifying directional arrays. Now, if you can see the name of the author of the article.
Jack Layton.
Jack Layton. Okay? This is what I have. This is my directional book that I've kept I've had this since I don't know when it was, 1990? I forget when it was published. But you may have remembered that book publisher called Tab Books. Yeah, this was published in 1974. I got this back in 1980 from a friend of mine, gentleman who was a 30-year engineer. I worked under him. I worked as his backup when he would go on vacation. I learned a lot, and one day he came up to me and says, you see this book? I'm going to give it to you because this is what's going to help you save your day when that call comes or something happens. You'll understand what you're doing until your consultant comes in and helps you fix the problem. That's not... But Brian knows. But that's not what happens today. Okay? And then because of that, you don't have that mindset. I mean, I was working on transmitters and I got myself burned many times on my kneecap, on my leg, my ankle, my finger. It's like, 200-300 watts. It hurts. Hurts real good. But you start to respect things. It's like an electrician. You sort of respect electricity once you get that first 1 or 2 zaps. But
so it sounds like that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead and finish your thought.
But it's the drive or desire to be curious, I guess is what I can call it.
Yeah,
because I have a niece and nephew when they were really young. Now they're in college, but when they were young, they didn't have that curiosity. Like they would come to me and say, "What is this? How do you know that this does that?" I'm like, "Well," and I tell them a story, and they're like, "But how did you know?" I didn't. I was curious and I learned. Yeah. It's that's the part that's hard to describe. I mean, I went was 1, 2, 3, 2 months ago. I was at a college telling people this. They look at me, I was nuts.
Yeah. Coincidentally, Chris, that book is available on Amazon for $127.84.
There you go.
And worth every penny if you've got a direction.
This has notes in it, so guess what? This is worth more.
Well, maybe that's the collectible one. They do say that there is one collectible from $249. So maybe that one's got some good Jack Lyon notes in it. Who knows?
I will. Next time, I'll bring in the NAB handbook from 1946, and when you read through this, it's a plethora of information that today, I don't think you can find it that easily. But tube transmitters, you definitely learn on those, and you can appreciate a lot. In solid state, you sort of like yawn. You just, oh yeah, okay, turn a knob, that's it. Tube transmitters, that's where you really learn how to do things. So and that cherry red look of the glass tube suddenly gets really, really red.
The takeaway here is that if you're confronted with a phaser cabinet, you have a directional AM array and it's not working right, and you're confronted with a phaser cabinet and it has all these attractive knobs on them.
Oh, yes.
Dial counters, and it's made to be, they're big knobs too. They're made to be grabbed and turned. And there's usually an antenna monitor nearby so you can turn the knob and look at the monitor. They're attractive. They beg you to come adjust them. Don't. That's the takeaway. Don't touch
I would
the
venture
knob
a guess that there are probably more people in that boat, the people who want to turn the knobs and see what happens, than there are people who have learned the lesson to just walk away. Call somebody, walk away. So,
and
it's true.
Because if something goes wrong with an AM directional system, chances I think are very slim that the problem will be corrected by turning a knob. Even though they're attractive and even though they're there to get the array in order, there's probably something you got to walk to every tower. Go look at the tower, open the base unit, see if there's a bee's nest, a wasp's nest, or a badger in there, and see if a capacitor's burned up or smoked. See if a wire's come off, a clip has come off a coil. Look for something that's gone wrong before you go turn that attractive knob. Would that be right?
Yeah, that would be correct.
Yeah. Maybe they should make maybe Kintronic should make phasers phasing cabinets that the knobs come off, and maybe it takes there's a handle that's
you can take them off. There's two Allen keys that you can loosen and slip it off. I've worked at radio stations where the engineer did that to make sure nobody got tempted. Here's another reference guide that was handy in my youth and still to this day is good stuff. See if you can see that one.
Not quite.
There we go.
Reference data for radio engineers.
Radio engineers, written by the Federal Telephone and Radio Corporation.
Oh.
An IT&T associate. This too was given to me by a gentleman who for many years was doing broadcast engineering and said to me, this will become handy. Many stuff you may never use, but trust me, it's a good way to learn to understand the fundamentals of how things function in the transmitter facility. And this was copyrighted 1943, first edition.
Well, really, I mean, when you think about how much it's changed, the fundamentals of our business, the FM and the AM side of it, they really haven't changed all that much. I mean, obviously we've added HD, and that adds a level of complexity to it, but there hasn't been a whole lot of change in the fundamental principles of how those transmitters work. So, those books probably still apply.
Well, they do, because on this page here, if you can see it, let's see if I do this right. You can see that those diagrams that are represented there, those are the patterns of a dipole antenna, dipole isotropic that is. And Kirk, you were talking earlier about the RPU, the remote pickup units, transmitters, the VHF and UHF. Well, the principles used today for that same antenna design is right here in this book. That hasn't changed. It's the laws of physics. Those particular laws stay intact. These are the things that people don't do anymore. I mean, right here, this information I have in these two books is enough to get somebody started if you had the drive.
It brings to mind that fiasco that happened with the first iPhone 4 and the antenna on it. You're holding it wrong. I mean, sure, nobody wants an antenna that pulls out of the phone like we used to have. They want the phone to be a candy bar with the antennas built in. But if you put the antenna around the edge and you grab the antenna with your hand, which will change the impedance of the antenna more or less at different points, you can really mess up the antenna. You're holding it wrong. Hey, you're watching This Week in Radio Tech. It's our War Stories episode, and we've been talking about kind of how we got started and learning about AM and FM and RF principles. our show is brought to you by the folks at Axia, and our guest is Bryan Jones. Bryan's done some engineering. He's also worked in tech support for a couple of different companies, and that's what I want to get into in the second part of our show here. All of us as engineers, we have to call tech support, and you know how much we hate calling tech support of consumer type companies because it's usually abysmal. But a number of broadcast equipment manufacturers have fantastic tech support, people who will really walk you through the problem. Now, it does help if you do your homework at the end where there's a problem. If you're an engineer and you got a problem, it helps if you can bring certain things to the conversation about getting your problem fixed. And that's a thing that Bryan and me and Chris are going to talk about after our break. So, Bryan, is that good with you? Can you tell us what a customer should bring to the conversation? That's great. Absolutely. Good. Well, our show is being brought to you by my employer, one of the divisions of the Telos Alliance, and that's Axia. Now, you know, we've talked about Axia a whole lot on this show. In fact, well, there's a beautiful console right there. Where's that one at? Is that at Universal or somewhere else? I don't know where that one is. The console with its own fan club, it says. Yeah, that's at, where is that? I don't know. I think that's the one at Universal. Anyway, there are over 4,000 Axia consoles worldwide in different studios. In fact, I was just assisting to put one in today. The engineers at Cumulus are putting in a gorgeous studio here in Nashville. It's a little bit of a secret, I guess, as to what that studio is going to be for. That'll all be known by about this time next week. In fact, we should have pictures. And on a future show, we'll do a tour. This is an absolutely beautiful studio that they're building. The show that we're doing right now, our audio is coming to you through an Axia Radius IP audio console. And, you know, it's not just the console, but it is the concept of putting audio on a network that really simplifies the work and gives you all kinds of capability that you may not have thought about before. In fact, I was just talking with a Cumulus engineer today, a guy named Mark Lamuth, and Mark is a good engineer. He has installed all different kinds of consoles. He's got a big facility in Atlanta where they have a lot of Wheatstone consoles, some TDM, some audio over IP. And so he's learning about the Axia Livewire system and all the things you can do with it. So today, in fact, Bryan Jones was on the phone with us, walking us through some techniques for getting contact closures to happen exactly where we wanted them to. You push a button and these three things happen. You push a button and this route changes. You get different audio coming out of a speaker or into a recorder based on a button press or other, you know, that kind of input. Bryan, is there anything that you'd like to add about the flexibility of an IP audio system like Axia when you're building a facility, especially a complicated one?
Well, that's one of the things I really like about a networked audio system, and it's, you know, you walk into every facility is different, and that's, I mean, we're not talking about VCRs and DVD players. That all of the audio over IP stuff is really a set of building blocks that allow, you know, people to build essentially whatever they need. And one of the things that really gets me going, that I really makes me enjoy my job, is when people you see that moment when the light comes on, right? They're skeptical about this audio over IP stuff, and this will never catch on, and I don't understand it. And then there's a moment when the light comes on, and that's the really rewarding time. And what they see is that if you can think it, it's probably pretty easy to make the system do what you want it to do without having to build a bunch of relays and circuits. I mean, Kirk, if you think, if you think back to just what we did today, and we really did basically three different things, right? We had a button do one thing and another button do another, and then we consolidated a couple of relays so that one on-air light was always on. And how would we have accomplished that in a previous life, right? Well,
a box and some diodes and a little wall wart power supply and a relay and wired
it would have been ugly, right?
Yeah.
And in this day and age, it's just a simple matter of configuring the system to tell it to do what you want it to do. And then there's some point. One of the things, Kirk, that I really enjoyed today was we spent that time with Mark, sort of, walking him through how to configure that. And he said, I want to do one more thing, and let me see if I understand that.
He did. He said, I want to do one more thing. And he walked you through it. All right. I think he maybe needed a couple pieces of advice, but yeah.
But he within a very short period of time, that you could see, I couldn't see him, but I could hear sort of that the light bulb came on. And for me, that's the moments that I like about being involved with this business, is when the customers go, I get it. So, and I think Mark gets it. I like those kind of things.
And interestingly, the thing that we're really talking about here is an adjunct to Axia. It's called Pathfinder. Pathfinder is not required for an Axia system to work, but if you want to add all kinds of complex functionality, there's a piece of software called Pathfinder, and it reaches out into an Axia network, and it controls, it monitors, it controls, it watches for button presses or other inputs or time of day commands or the presence or absence of audio anywhere on a system, and then it can make decisions. We call them stacking events, where it can look for, hey, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? Or are two of these things true? You can have, it's this big logic engine, and then it'll go and affect changes on the network. You can press one button and have wholesale changes in what's going on. One of the other interesting things that, Bryan, that we had to come up with this afternoon was the studio has a studio audience, and we want to feed PA to the studio audience all the time, but we don't. But there's also a crowd mic in the studio audience, and we want to feed everything to the studio audience PA, but not the crowd mic. And so we didn't want to take up a program bus on an Axia console to do that. We certainly could have, and that'd be the easy way to do it, but it would use up a program bus. So we ended up building an aux bus that does the same thing. It provides everything but the crowd mic in the PA feed, and still gives the engineer a quick and easy way to adjust the volume of that if he needs to.
There was an easier way to do that, right?
Oh, you're going to tell me what it was now.
I set that crowd mic up as a codec. It'll automatically create a mix minus backfeed for him.
Yeah, except they wanted a volume control to control the volume of what went to the PA feed, and we ended up with an aux feed. You can press the aux send button.
Yes, indeed.
One button and one turn away.
All right.
Yeah. So
that's the other thing too, is there's lots of different ways to accomplish things in a system like this, as you found out.
Well, whether your system is simple, hey, Andrew Zarian at the GFQ network, he's got a fairly simple system, although he does have several mix minuses going on right now, at least 3 of them going on right now, and he can do 4. He can actually do 8 mix minuses on his console. And that means that me and if Tom Ray was here, if Chris Tarr was here, Chris Tobin, who is here, and Bryan, we all hear each other just fine without getting any echo back from ourselves. And that's just a wonderful thing to have. So anyway, you need a system that's small, medium, or really large and complex. Check out Axia, all the things it can do. It's just amazing. Whether you're running one studio or like Radio Free Europe, you're running about 50 or 60 studios now. You can do it all with Axia and IP audio. Check it out on the web, axiaaudio.com. All right, you're watching This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, along with Bryan Jones, our guest, and Chris Tobin, who is one of our regular co-hosts here. It's a War Stories episode. And in this episode, I thought we'd bring Bryan into, and Bryan's been doing tech support for companies for about 15 years now, between Telos and Audio Vault. So Bryan, here I am, an engineer out in the wild. I got a piece of equipment or a piece of software or a computer driving me nuts. I don't know how to make it do what it's supposed to do. My time is running out. I'm tired. Maybe I haven't been to the station in a while. I don't know the intricacies of this piece of software or this piece of hardware. I want to call you up and cuss you out or just tell you all my problems. I just want to dump on you and then have you help me. Is that what I should do, or is there maybe a better way to go about helping you help me?
Well, you want to know what you should do, or do you want to know what most people actually do?
Well, maybe you can give us an example of the wrong way to do it and the right way to do it.
Well, there's, we don't. A lot of people mistakenly think that because they bought the system from us, or that we're the manufacturer, that we somehow magically know exactly how everything in your facility is configured, right? And what's the serial number of the console that's in Studio B, and what's the serial number of the node that feeds the transmitter? And I'm sorry, but we just don't know that. And so, if you cannot call for help with that level of expectation, things will go much better, because I'm going to ask you questions that sort of help me get you, to a solution to the problem. But I don't know everything. I wish I did, but I just don't. Well, didn't we buy this from you? Don't you know what I have? Well, yes, I can go through and see an equipment list, but I don't know. I mentioned the building blocks, right, and that everything is different. The node that you guys are using or that you use, that you set up at Mark's place today, is going to be doing different things than the node that Chris has at his place and the node that I have sitting here beside me. And so when I ask you questions, just be prepared to answer them if you can, and don't be frustrated if you can't. We have remote tools that allow us to remote into most anybody's system, and I'll help you through the questions. But people don't call just to say howdy and hey, what's going on? We love your stuff, right? They call because there's a problem, right? So they're frustrated. They're like Chris. They got the program director breathing down their neck, saying, "Hey, when's this going to be fixed? And how do we prevent this from happening again? And what was the root cause?" And I don't have an answer from them. And in some cases we deal with international clients, and there's a language barrier. And so it's just, when you call for help, just a little patience on your part will go a long ways. And, we'll get to a solution. I promise you we'll get to a solution. But,
I've always imagined, Bryan, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to work for me. When I'm calling for some tech support, sometimes I call you guys for our own equipment in Telos, and of course, sometimes I'm calling. I mean, I do still engineer for 8 radio stations, so there's non-Telos gear I work with too. I try to give the tech support person I'm talking to 2 views of what I'm trying to do and what the problem is. I try to give them a broad view. Hey, I'm trying to send a mix-minus feed to my phone system, and the caller keeps hearing themselves echo back. So that's a broad view, and I have this console, and I'm trying to send the right audio to the caller. Then I have a narrow view. I've got the send audio to the caller on the phone system. I've got that hooked up to your output number J3, and I've got the fader set up this way. Does that sound So I'm trying to give a broad view and a narrow view, and that gives this tech support guy, to my way of thinking, a big picture of what I'm trying to get done, or a big picture of what the problem is, or sometimes it's best just to give a big picture of what the symptom is, and then given the specifics that and then shut up and answer some questions after that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's the good thing is that most of the people that call us for support have a pretty good level of understanding of how the system is put together and the piece parts and what they all do. Now, don't get me wrong. We get some that, it's the first time they've pulled their IQ radius, smaller IP audio console out of the box. And how do I get started? Right. That's, getting a new console and having to hook it up to a computer network first thing, that's a little counterintuitive. It's something that we're not used to as broadcast engineers. I want to pull it out, and I want the instruction manual to show me where to hook up my analog audio inputs and where do I hook up my speakers. And in an AOIP world, any output can really be anything. So if you want your control room monitors to come out of an output, and we pick analog output 1, and we say here's where our control room monitors come out of. Unlike our old consoles that we used to have, there's no port that's specifically labeled control room monitor, because it may come out of a node in another room. Sort of like what we were doing with Mark Lamuth today. So it just it really. If I could give advice to anybody who's calling in, it would be a little patience. Know that I'm here to help you. My job is to help you fix whatever's wrong. And I know that program director is hollering at you, and life is bad, but it's my job to make you look good in the eyes of your program director. So know that when you call me and you get me for support, that's what I'm going to be focused on. So
Chris Tobin, you've been on both sides of this tech support fence because for years and years you've worked in broadcasting, and now you're running a manufacturing, an R&D and manufacturing concern at Musicam. What advice can you give to folks who are frustrated they got a piece of gear or a system not working? How can an engineer best get help from a tech support department?
Well, I will say this. I do have experience with the Axia system. I have experience with the others as well, and the old-fashioned Molex connector, control room speaker plug, and those Pacific recorder consoles and others, and the Amphenol connectors of years past. I would say one of the things I used to do, when I would call for tech support, this includes at the time Axia, I used to keep notes of what I was doing when things were going, south, going in out of control. And then I would explain to the tech support people, here's what I've been doing, here's what I've done, here are the symptoms that started my little path down of destruction. Where did I make the wrong turn? Now, on the other side, on the tech support side, what I would suggest, and I've done this and it's actually worked out really well, is when I get the calls, and I still get calls, I helped several people today in Belgium, I think it was. And the first thing I ask is, one, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm okay. I say, you off the air? No. Okay, good. Do you have anyone breathing down your neck right now? No. Good. How about this? What was the last thing you did before the place blew up? And that usually, 90% of the time, will give you insight as to what to do with the 10% trouble they've created. Think about it. If it's computer-based, as Bryan points out, AOIP now, it's, an in and out can be the same thing. It's like a computer serial port. It has ins and outs on the same connector. XLAWs, it's either one or the other. What was the last thing you did with the device or system before it crashed or went berserk, whatever you want to call it? And I've found that 90% of the time when they tell me they did this, I go, oh, perfect. Here's what you need to do. Boop, 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 boop. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's working. There you go. Now, rule of thumb. What's that? Never do what you did again. Second, let's make a backup. Let's make a backup file of that particular setting or configuration from that device. And now you save that. So if you do this again, just repeat the steps with this profile, and then you're off and running. And I have to say, it's worked. Yeah, it's worked a lot. I did that with several systems when I was working at CBS. We had a lot of systems that were computer-based, and I made a lot of backup files. Several manufacturers made fun of me for doing that, but one day, one of their techs was on site, had a problem, something blew up one of the systems, and a profile completely lost. Literally, and at our facilities in New York, we had the all news stations and sports, and you can imagine mixed minuses. It's more than just, it's more than 8 and less than 32. So, a console that's supporting a sports broadcast of a ball game suddenly loses everything. You got to panic. Well, I made these files. People thought it was funny. Sure enough, the tech on site was like, I need to rebuild this console. Do we have backups? Everyone's like, I don't think so. Raise my hand. Yeah, we do. Where are they? So, why? What? I said, it's a bad habit I have. I've been doing it for years. I work on transmitter at 3 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I do is I take notes of all the readings, temperatures, everything. And I put it in a book. I just put it aside. Then I go to do what I have to do. If something doesn't come back on when I'm trying to make it work after I've done the repairs, I go back to my notes and go, oh, I did leave something out. Okay, boop, boop. And there you go. So today in the computer world, taking notes is important. And I know for a fact, friends of mine who are strictly IT people, and not broadcasters, but IT, there is no discipline when it comes to this stuff. They will program a Cisco switch, keyboard crazy, typing away, doing everything, and sit there and go, I don't understand why it's not working. The port's not, it's. I was like, well, what did you do? What was the last thing you did? I did, it's just a standard thing. I'm like, now we're lost. I said, you basically threw the compass and the map out the window while we're driving down the hill, basically. I would say just for people like Bryan and others, you guys got it made. You just have to just try and make sure the person on the other end is calm. And as far as those of us, end users, broadcast engineers or studio engineers, if you run into a snag, and you didn't take notes, which is okay, it's human nature. Try to think of the last thing you did, and most of the time that'll get you out of trouble. It'll help people like Bryan solve the problem for you, and you look like a hero.
Right.
Right? I mean, at the end of the day, you got to make it work. And if you got to look like a hero because that's the way the environment is in your office or your studio facility, so be it. But then you've learned. See, this is where we go back to what we talked about earlier. That learning process, the curiosity, the understanding why it's doing this. Remember one thing. Einstein always said, I don't need to remember my phone number because I don't call myself, but I do know how to research and find the answers when I need them. That's what you have to do. Axia system, huge flexibility. I mean, some personal experience, I can say that, and from friends of mine who've installed them and use them. Huge. There's no way any one person could ever know all the ins and outs. And Brian, he pointed out, Kirk mentions one way of doing something with a crowd mic. Brian comes up with one solution. The other guys came up with another. There's probably 3 others you can still use, and they all do the thing you need. You can't remember that, but if you know where to find it, if it's in the case of Pathfinder, then you're off and running. You got it. You can say, you want to do this, type this, boom. That's what's cool. Same thing with transmitters. Transmitter facilities, STL links, whole thing, just at different levels. That's my 2 cents. I hope that helps.
And one piece of advice I would like to give to people is don't. I mentioned that we have the ability to remote into your system and basically configure anything that needs to be configured. But Kirk, how much time did I spend working on Mark's system today as opposed to having Mark do it? Not much, right? And what I really want is when we're done, I want you to walk away with an understanding of what happens, so that the next time something needs to be done, you don't just say, I don't know, some guy from Axia logged in and took care of it. Call him.
I know.
So.
And you were really good at just a few suggested words to Mark Lamuth, and you were like, okay, Mark, you're driving. I showed you once. You're driving now. Go ahead and set this next part up. And you walked him right through. And by the way, here's how we had the setup. And by the way, this is so common now in broadcast gear and anything technical. I realize if you've got a transmitter, it may not have a network interface on it. It may not be remotely accessible that way. But if you're dealing with a lot of studio stuff, chances are you're dealing with a lot of computers nowadays. In our case, we had a business network, and we had a separate network for the Axia Livewire. We have a computer there, and many facilities do this, have a computer that has 2 network cards in it. That way, somebody from the outside world, with permission from you, can remote into that computer, and then on that computer they can open up a browser or an application or whatever is needed to deal with the stuff that you want to deal with. This is really helpful and key. So many companies in the broadcast world now have the ability to remote into your gear if you set up your end of it. And so this is one of the first, not one of the last things, this is one of the first things you ought to set up. It used to be when I was building a new studio, one of the first things I'd set up was the speakers and the power amp and enough of the console to get the CD player or my iPod through it, right? So I can enjoy some tunes while I'm building the rest of the studio. Well,
that's right.
Nowadays, one of the first things you really ought to set up is a computer that is going to be accessible to the outside world, again, with your permission, using TeamViewer or GoToAssist or whatever your support guys may want to use, and then have that computer be able to access other things on the network so they can come in and help you out. And the other thing is, don't just call a company and say, hey, would you configure my phone system now? Thanks a lot. Bye. No. Watch what they're doing. Learn from it. This is like free education, or maybe they're charging you. But whatever it is, use it so you can learn to do it yourself and figure it out the next time. So, Brian, I appreciate you doing that, and that's what good tech support people ought to do, especially if they don't want to get another call back for the same thing. Educate people how to get it done. So the other thing I thought I'd mention about that, let's see, the remote access, real important. Oh gosh, it was right on the tip of my tongue, or the front of my brain, and now it's just about evaporated. Was gosh, I forget what it was now. I thought, here's another tenet of tech support that. Here's what it was. In this day and age of forums on the internet, there's broadcast.net, and there's just different radio forums that you can go to, and many engineers participate in them. In fact, one of our usual co-hosts, Chris Tarr, has a forum for engineers to chat about problems. And it's easy to go to one of these forums and say, hey, I've got a Telos this or that, or I've got a Barracks this or that, and it's not working. Anybody know what to do, or what should I do? And sure enough, there's a lot of the usual suspects. Same people come forth with a lot of different advice. And just be aware that probably most of the advice you're hearing is not coming from the factory. And it's going to be based on experience, maybe recent experience, but it may be very old experience. Mm-hmm. And I know that at Telos, we occasionally have been frustrated by people in forums giving out information that may have been true 10 years ago, but is no longer true today. Maybe we've got a great simple solution to the problem that the inquirer has, and people are piling on with information that frankly is really, really old. So, or in some cases, even just completely incorrect, or they're misreading the situation or the way the questioner asked the question. It's just, you can tell, he's not asking this question right. That can't happen. Maybe he means this. Maybe he means that. Point is, it may need a real-time conversation. So, Bryan, I wonder if you'd speak to that notion. On the one hand, hey, get help wherever you can. On the other hand, maybe you ought to call the factory first and see what they have to say about your problem. Got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's there's always we're always working on. We're a hardware company. We build hardware, but that hardware all runs on software, and there's lots of things that get added to the software over time. And I'll just give you an example. Kirk, you and I had a conversation today about how to make mono outputs out of stereo sources. And in previous maturations of Axia stuff, you'd have to run it through what we call a V mode, which is it's a configuration option in an Axia device that allows you to take a stereo channel and mono it out and make a new mono channel out of that. But in the newer products, we have the ability to, right on the configuration, we have the ability to do a left plus right sum on the output, so you don't have to make a mono channel out of that.
Yes, yeah.
And so your point about the V modes being the old way of doing it, and we've updated the software, so now there's a much easier way to do that. You may not get that through a forum, so you may be doing it the harder way. Where if you just call us and say, "Hey, here's what I want to do. What's the best way to do it?" and we'll tell you what that is, without having to, without us having to spend a lot of time reading through the forums, and we really don't care. We're here because I work on the West Coast. One of us works till 7 o'clock every night, where we're actually at the desk. So really, until 10 p.m. Eastern time, you can call, and there's one of us sitting at the desk waiting to take your call. And after hours, we like to say that's sort of emergency support. But the bottom line is, if you call and you think it's an emergency, we're going to take your call, even if it's just to say, "Hey, what's the best way to do this?" So by all means, I agree with you 100%. I'd rather you call and we give you the answer and you get things configured or fixed in a short period of time than be frustrated because you've been going through the forums and talking to people in there for 2 days before you bother to call the factory. So
let me ask you. We're going to run out of time here shortly. Let me ask you one more question about support. And I know that whether whether you're taking calls when you worked at Broadcast Electronics or with Telos, any support organization, you're going to get calls from people who honestly aren't qualified to understand your answer. If you were talking to an engineer, that is. In other words, you get non-engineers calling you saying, "Hey, I need you to fix this problem for me," and they don't have an understanding of how the system works. Now, this has been going on for years, but I swear I think it's getting more and more and more. On the one hand, I'm sure support organizations want to help any customer. How do you deal with customers who honestly don't know what to do with the answer with the right answer because they don't have the technical chops to deal with it?
It's very difficult, and I'll give you an example. It happened just 2 days ago. Had a call from a customer out in the Northeast, and they said my mic number 3 in the studio isn't working. Is that a wide orbit problem or is that an Axia problem? And I said, well, I don't think it would be a wide orbit problem. It's most likely either an Axia configuration issue or there's just something wrong. And so I logged into the system and I said, okay, I want you to talk into the microphone. So I logged onto their system and I looked at the meters on the node to see if I was seeing any meters moving from the microphone, and there wasn't. And I said, okay, well, we're not seeing any meters on the node. How is that microphone? How's the microphone hooked up to the node? And she said, what do you mean? How's it hooked up? And I said, well, there's the microphone and it's hooked on a little boom and there's a cable that comes out and it hooks up to something. Does it go into another device? Does it go directly into the Axia node? And she just didn't know. And I said, okay, well, you're probably going to need to get an engineer in to look at this. And she said, hold on, let me take some notes. And I said, okay, and this is where where your point really comes into view, Kirk, and that's that people aren't qualified to take the answers that you give them. So I tried to explain to her that there's a cable that goes from the microphone into what is probably a microphone processor, and she says, wait a minute, and I know what she's doing. She's got her pen, and she says, cable from microphone, and I'm thinking, oh, this is bad, right? I said, I think what you're really going to need is an engineer to come in and take a look at this. And she said, well, who do you recommend? And I said, you mean you want me to recommend an engineer? I said, who's your engineer? Well, we don't have one. So, it's very difficult sometimes to provide support in situations like that. And in that case, and it's no fault of hers. She didn't. She's just the one taking the phone call, trying to solve the problem. But in this case, she was not qualified to hear the answer. So,
and it sounds like a lot of problems don't take a rocket scientist engineer. They take somebody who knows how to hook up a stereo system and think, oh, there's a mic and a cable, and it probably goes when we follow it. It goes over. Oh, there is a mic processor, and it's underneath stuff where nobody will touch it. And oh, look, it's turned off, or it came unplugged, or some magic smoke came out of it, and we need to bypass it.
As you know, and Chris can probably attest to that. Half the battle is not turning into Chicken Little when something goes wrong. You don't run around, screaming the sky is falling. Just stop and try and take a look at the problem from a reasonable standpoint.
That's actually the best thing you can do. Actually, when I was working in one facility, I used to train with folks and explain to them, when you get the phone call from the newsroom or from the FM studios, the music studios, one thing you must portray. They said, what's that? I would say, have you been to the beach lately? Well, yeah. Do the beach you go to have lifeguards? Yes. Have you watched what the lifeguards do while people are out swimming? Well, yeah, they're just sitting there watching, and I say, are they calm? Or are they reading a book and training? Or are they frantically doing something else other than watching the crowd on the beach? No, they're just looking up and down the beach, right? Well, that's what's going to be your job. You're in the Tech Operations Center. You're going to get a call from one of the 12 studios that are in this building. And who knows what time of day or night it will be. And the other end, the person at the other end is going to be panicking, screaming. You need to stay calm, no matter what they say, what they swear they're going to do, no matter what VP of whatever department they claim they know, and they're going to call them out of bed. You stay calm, because you'll get the best answers, and you'll figure out what the problem is and solve it. And when you do solve it, their response to their boss will be, I don't know who's at the other end in engineering, but those guys, they stayed calm while I was losing my head, and we got the problem solved. Everybody looks.
They'll never admit to that, but hopefully they at least give you credit for doing a good job.
Well, I can say that I've had some folks do it. If you have a group that everyone follows the same thinking, and the image from the department is portrayed as, hey, these guys do get it, and they stay calm no matter how goofy things get, and yes, they are geeks, but they seem to understand my world, you will get the compliments. If you do treat them like, if you want to call it, idiots, because that's what tech people have, antisocial skills, then you should expect not to get anything from them but antisocial remarks. I mean, it's true. I can tell you, I've worked in places where people would prefer to talk to me over that of somebody else because of the image that person portrayed. But yet the other person was more qualified than I, because I didn't do work in that room. But that's perception. That's the other equation, the other part of the equation that you're right, Brian, that you pointed out. Here's a person writing down cable, microphone. All right, that was how many things? That's what's going to happen. But if you do have a place where you can set an environment or an expectation, as we talked about earlier, then you'll be in good shape. But staying calm. You got to stay calm. You can't be Chicken Little. Absolutely.
So, actually, the last couple of days, I handled a tech support thing for Telos, and that this qualifies as a war story. I'm going to keep it real short. You may have noticed on this show, our sponsor Telos, and in some advertising and on the website, we've been talking about using an app called Lucy Live or Lucy Live Lite and with a Telos codec. So here's what the app looks like, and different companies. Some companies private label this for themselves, and others just encourage you to get the generic one. And so our tech support team, we got a call from a station, a rural station, a small town, and I could tell the gentleman I was speaking with was not an engineer, but he really had to make this thing work. He bought a Telos Zip 1 IP audio codec, and he got, as part of a promotion, he got a paid-for copy of Lucy Live Lite. And he couldn't get the two to talk to each other. And so you have to set a port forward on your internet router for this to work, and for that particular piece of software to work with that codec. And he had I said, here, I've got a video on YouTube. Watch the video and set the port on your router. He said, I watched the video. I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, wow, dang, I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. So I'll tell you what, do you have a computer on your network that has TeamViewer on it? And if not, I'll make other arrangements. He said, well, yeah, actually I do. He knew what TeamViewer was. Apparently he's been getting tech support from somebody else too. So I was able to TeamView into his system. And oh, by the way, he was very, very worried that if I made a change to his router, he wouldn't have internet for 2 days, which is what happened the last time somebody made a change to his router. And so I said, sir, I've done this literally 200 times. I will not mess up your internet. He said, well, we have this Linksys router, and it's a pretty expensive one. He said, I think it was about $100. So I said, listen, not a problem. Let me TeamView into your system. You watch what I do, and we'll set this port forward for you. And so we did. I mean, it literally 4 minutes later, bam, we had the port forward done. I think he understood what I showed him. We set up the Zip 1 by remote, did that. So if we didn't have the remote, this couldn't get done. Couldn't get solved. No way, no how. And then, now here's where the interesting tech support part came in. Yesterday I was in Cleveland, Ohio. Today I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. In either city, I could easily use Lucy Live Lite and get into his Zip 1 and send audio to him and hear audio back. No problem. I could do it with an Android phone. I could do it with an iPad. I could do it on 4G. I could do it on Wi-Fi. It worked. It just worked every single time. And yet he was saying, it's not working for me, or it's working sometimes. He told me he went home that night and tried it with his phone, and it worked. And he came back to the station this morning, and it didn't work. And he was really getting upset because sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. And it didn't occur to me what might have been happening. It didn't occur to me at all. Even though I do the same thing, it didn't occur to me that he would be doing the following. And later today, this gentleman figured it out for himself. And I'm so proud that he did, because I'm not sure that I would have. And here's the difference. In an app like Lucy Live Lite, you put in the public IP address of your router and a port number, and so you can zoom into your station and into your codec, this time a Zip 1, from outside, from somewhere else on the internet, like from your cell phone 4G service. Well, when he was in his radio station, the cell phone would switch to Wi-Fi.
3G.
No, it switched to Wi-Fi. So he was on the same network as the Zip 1. And some routers are smart enough to sort of loop this request out and back in, as if it came from the outside world. Other routers are not that smart, or they don't do that. I forget, there's a word they call that. I can't remember what it was. But the bottom line was, when he was local in his network, it still would have worked. He just would have had to type in the local IP address, the LAN address of his Zip 1. And then if he's outside, he would have to dial the WAN address. But it didn't occur to me that this might be happening. And luckily, the customer figured it out. He noticed, wait a minute, whenever I'm in the studio, it doesn't work. And when I leave the radio station building, it does work. And then he told me about the Wi-Fi, and I said, doggone it, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. I can make it work in the studio for you. You'll just have to dial a different, use a different preset. So there's an example. He and I, we all in all, we probably talked for an hour, maybe a little over an hour, about different options for getting into the system remotely, whether it's 3G, 4G, a cradle point box, get Wi-Fi from the high school he was at, or get wired service, or all these things. But finally, in the end, after I set it up, it came down to the customer actually figuring out what was going on. I think, and
as I recall from talking to him, the whole reason why he did this was because his advertisers told him that if he didn't get a better quality signal for these broadcasts, that they were going to drop him, and he would lose the revenue from doing those high school games.
Interesting. He did not disclose that to me.
Yeah. So this was uber important to him. It was the most important thing that he had to do that day, was get that working. So
and it was important. He to tell me it was very important. What's interesting though is that look, it's a small town station. I own some small town stations. We don't have any money either, but it's always going to be tenuous to glom onto somebody else's internet to do live remotes. Even though you can, this can work. It's hard to count on a whole season of high school basketball for free. My encouragement is, hey, whatever you were going to spend on a phone line or an ISDN line, spend that on internet, and you should have no trouble. But if you're going to glom onto the school's Wi-Fi, you may have a problem. So,
yep.
Key times. Hey guys, we're out of time. Bryan, thank you so much for your insights.
Well, I was honored to be asked to be a part of this, Kirk. I've been watching your show for, like I said, I told you earlier, I don't catch it every week, but I do follow you on Twitter, and you tweet that out there. And when it's something that I look like I might want to see, I log on and watch longingly and think someday I'll be asked to be on. And so here I am. So I'm honored, and I appreciate you asking me.
Hey, and you bring up a good point. If you in the audience, if you are an engineer, somebody associated with the technical aspects of broadcasting, especially radio, but television's okay too, or internet broadcasting, and you have something to say, hey, contact me. That's easy. You can write to on our website, on the This Week in Radio Tech.com website. You can contact us that way. I think you can write to thisweekinradiotech@gmail.com. If you follow me on Twitter, send me a tweet at @KHarnack or @TWiRT Show, our Twitter handles. I'm findable in 3 seconds on Facebook. So if you have something to say, talk to me, and maybe we'll interview you. I think it'd be great. We find people all the time, and a lot of time it's last minute. So Bryan agreed to be on the show about 4 hours ago, and I sure do appreciate that, Bryan. Thanks.
I had to jump in the shower and comb my hair. So
also with us, Chris Tobin, the best dressed engineer in radio from Manhattan, New York. Chris, thanks for your insights on this War Stories episode.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime. There's plenty of them.
There are.
Chris, I'll be in Manhattan in a couple of weeks. I'd like to come see you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, last time you and I spoke was under a different employer.
Yeah, we were. I believe we were both employed by the same employer.
That's right.
Yep.
But hey, Tom's a good guy, though. Tom's a good guy you mentioned earlier.
If you're both in Manhattan on the same night, and if it's a Thursday night, you ought to hop in the car or subway or something and get over to the GFQ network in Queens. And both of you just do the show live from there. Look, here I am inviting people into Andrew's living room.
It's no problem, Kirk, but there's only one problem. There's a lot of drinking that happens afterwards.
Oh!
That's I have no problem. Bryan will catch up.
All right. Well, guys, thanks again for being here. Our sponsor show has been brought to you by Axia and Livewire IP Audio. All the things you can do that are just amazing. Solve all kinds of problems. Get rid of all the ditty boxes in your facility and just do everything you do over Ethernet. It's just amazing. Trust me. It just works cool. Andrew, thank you very much for providing the venue and for switching our show. We appreciate your dedication. A couple hours every week. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kirk.
All right. Hey, we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.
That's all the bandwidth we can pilfer this week. Another TWiRT has propagated, and all the transmitters and audio equipment live happily ever after, thanks to the handsome engineer and his kind, benevolent care. We'll be back next week.
Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
This Week in Radio Tech. Subscribe to iTunes and you'll never miss a show. Search for This Week in Radio Tech in the iTunes Store. Soliciting is strictly encouraged. If you like today's show, tell a friend. If you didn't like it, we were never here. Kirk Harnack's wardrobe provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross Disaster Relief Services. Hair and makeup provided by Penelope Garcia Hernandez Weinberg.
He's unique, wouldn't you say?
I just want to get it over with.
This ends this transmission. Tango, Whiskey, India, Romeo, Tango. Signing off. Okay.